on Audacity. I'm recording on my audio memos on my phone, and I'm also on our Skype call.
I'm avoiding legal snags by telling you you're recorded. We're covered. Okay, here's my pause. Hello and welcome back to the Carl and David podcast, aka whatever we end up calling it, aka the Guelph Magazine podcast, aka Zooming In. We're on episode 3. We're on format number 2. Try to stay with us. We're trying to stay with us. Here's what we're going to do. David and I have known each other for a long time, are going to take turns hosting. We're each going to host 5-minute segments. In those segments, the host is going to present a prediction. It's going to be a testable, verifiable prediction, the kind of prediction you could bet on, that you could then go back and evaluate our forecasting skills based on. The prediction will be presented with no context or justification, and then the other one of us is the guest of that segment will make his own prediction. We'll talk about it. We'll move on, and we'll do 6 of those. So pretty much 30 minutes of idle, wild, and ultimately foolhardy, since it can be tested, predictions. David, you're up first. Start us off.
Excellent. Hello, Carl.
Hello.
It is nice to be podcasting with you again. Okay, the first prediction I have is this. Somewhere around 10,000 athletes attended the 2016 Olympics. How many will go to the 2021 Olympics, assuming that it happens? My prediction is 5,000 athletes.
Wow. Go to, like, they have to be in the host country, which we now think is Japan. They have to be at the host site. There's not going to be, we're not counting if they suddenly decide there's going to be all these satellite places to somehow make travel more minimal.
I would say they still count as athletes, but I don't think that.
I mean, it's not a very realistic scenario, but it might bump up my prediction a little.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because your prediction feels kind of like my expected value, like if I weight by probability all the possible numbers, but that actual number doesn't feel that likely to me because it seems more like it's sort of bimodal, as we say in the business. There's a very high probability that it'll be the same, and there's also a high probability, hopefully not as high, that it just won't happen. And so that might sort of average out to 5,000. I'm going to go with 8,000 because I think it happens, but there are lots of reasons to think that, sports might retrench, or some countries might not send full delegations, or there will be just individual athletes who can't go or choose not to go. Also, just budgets are going to be really hit hard for these Olympic committees, spending to get people there. I'm really interested in the Paralympics too. I mean, that brings in a lot less revenue. It's a much tougher justification if you're just looking at it from a revenue basis. So I think, that percentage could be much lower, which is really sad. I think it's a great event.
Yep. Agreed about the Paralympics. I think that the Olympics are going to be cut in half participation-wise, not because of fewer countries participating, but because there will be fewer sports, because I think that contact sports and team sports, in which the teams contact each other, I guess that team contact sports, basketball, etc., are going to be less likely to
individual
happen.
Contact sports now that you
Absolutely. Yeah. Judo, those sorts of things, grappling type stuff is where you can't social distance in any way, I think are likely to not happen. But I think that there will also be some countries that, as a result of that, don't send delegations or boycott entirely or whatever. And I think that this will basically, like a pared down Olympics. It seems to me the only way that the Olympics could happen, and it feels to me like they really need the Olympics to happen. So I think that that's what's going to go. But an Olympics without basketball or a bunch of these sports that require people to touch each other would be a very weird one.
Yeah, I mean, this opens up so many questions for me that it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. So first of all, there's a chance that the pandemic's still rolling. We don't have a vaccine. They just can't go ahead, or they have to push it back beyond 2021, which, there have been previous cataclysmic events that have affected international sporting events for multiple years. It'd be a real shame. On the other hand, I think there's going to be so much push for this to happen, so much desire for this like positive event to go forward. And there's also enough time to be flexible. So for instance, bring the world's best basketball shooters and have a shooting contest. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I don't know, there's archery, right? It's kind of the archery of basketball. There are ways to sort of to keep it at the same scale, or have more people eligible for the sports that are totally safe and totally fine. And it'll be every sport, I think, has time now to kind of come up with contingency plans, adapt. So do countries. On the other hand, two things I think of that maybe also bring down my number a little towards yours. One is when I think of like how much sport I'm likely to play in a year versus a year ago, it might be a sort of similar just downgrade. Like there's just a lot that won't feel as necessary. And the Olympics is kind of bloated. There's way more than enough content for the number of weeks. And that's not a bad thing. Like when I was in London in 2012, if there had been a channel where after the Olympics were over, it had shown me every single event in every sport over the next however long it could last, I would totally have watched that. And I think people are pushing for the BBC to do that right now, essentially. So there is room for it to like cut some of the events or some of the number of athletes and still have way more than enough content to make it feel very rich.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that neither of us has sort of mentioned specifically is that 2021 summer is roughly when we think there's going to be a vaccine available for COVID or whatever we want to call this thing. And I believe that if there is a vaccine, and then we can have like an Olympic Village and things like that make it more likely that you could do that. But I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that they will have that all. They will know that there will definitely be one in the planning up to it. So it may be that just things get pared down in order to try to do that. But it is going to be fascinating. I also think that it could be great for, just like a lot of people watch the WNBA draft last week because there's nothing else on TV that's sports related. It could be the time to shine for a lot of really excellent socially distant sports that we wouldn't necessarily ever get their time in the sun. So it could be good for some folks.
Archery, since I mentioned it, you don't have to be anywhere near anybody else. Okay,
in fact, you shouldn't be that near anyone else.
All right, I think we've hit our 5 minutes. So I think that'll be a really good one to watch. I had an Olympics topic in mind, which I'll skip. Yours was better anyway. Thinking ahead again, but maybe even farther ahead, just to have a different time frame. 5 years from now, I didn't do the research you did to know how many athletes or the equivalent of how many athletes were in the last Olympics. But whatever the number is, number of Americans in 2019 who went into a workplace that isn't their home, let's say at least 3 days a week on average over the course of the year, what will be the percentage change of that number in 2025? Oh, and I predict first. I predict there will be a 35% decline.
That is a huge decline, Carl. And to be nitpicky about numbers, you're saying we're going not by
percentage, but by actual count. Yeah.
By actual count, and so presumably, assuming that this thing ends at some point, the population number in 2025 will be slightly higher than the population number in 2019. So there'll be a slightly larger workforce to begin with.
Workforce, I don't know about number of employed, but yes.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that I would say.
Oh, and this is a U.S. question. I should clarify.
Okay. I think it will be about 15% lower, not 35, although it should be 35. And I think we're learning now that it should be well below that, even in that basically there are lots and lots of workers out there that do not need to be in an office, that go into an office every day. I think that we're also, one of the things that I've learned is that my experience of work is very different from everyone else's experience of work. In that I've worked from home for a long time. I have, my job is to write stuff and make stuff. And there's certainly plenty of, a large chunk of the workforce has to go somewhere in order to make the thing that they make, because they're actually producing something that's tangible and real and useful. But and a lot of people are drivers and and work at specific shops and things of that nature. But I think that of the people that go into an office that have white collar jobs, basically all of that, we're going to create the infrastructure during this pandemic such that almost every single one of them could work from home in perpetuity, basically. There's no reason for us to go sit around a conference table anymore. There's no reason for us to have a cubicle that anymore. There's no reason for us to take cars in to work every day just to go sit somewhere and then come back and sit somewhere and come back. But I think that's not the same thing as people actually doing that. I think that one of the reasons that people go into an office all the time is that their bosses don't trust them. And I think that it's going to be they're going to conflate the lack of productivity when you have to be homeschooling your children and you've never worked from home before and all of that, to say that actually when you're at home working, you're not actually that productive. This part of the white collar workforce, and that there won't have been enough time to see that actually people can get a lot more done and working from home is a lot better than working in an office. And so that there will be this push by bosses who want more control over their workforce to have them back in an office. So I think it will reduce, but not nearly as much as it could.
Yeah, I think that 5 years was key to my prediction. I think that once it seems okay to go back, a lot of bosses will want people back, but also a lot of people will want to be back. A lot of people get a lot out of being in an office, maybe more than you and I do, or at least it's more worth it to them. And I love going into my office. I just love working from home even more. That's before all this. From what I read, the initial period back in the office, though, is not going to be great, or it's going to be so different and weird, and probably most people won't even be able to go back just because of the sort of density and elevator use. What's up?
Is that because of the social distancing? You think that there's going to be a period of that when people do go back?
I expect, yes, for sure. Oh. And yeah, I was just reading a story in Vice about even just elevators and high rises, and that will probably kind of limit the number, or at least make people have staggered schedules. I mean, elevators already can be a choke point in office buildings when there's no issue in piling people in. And then there's public transit issues. So I think the initial period there's going to be this excitement to go back, and then people are going to realize they're going back to the place, but it's not what they remember. But I think there are going to be two other really big factors here by 5 years from now. Right now, there are office leases that are still happening. So there's a real push to use that space, and we've got it anyway. It's a sunk cost. But when they come up for renewal, I think a lot of companies are going to take a hard look at that number. I also think people are going to start, depending on how long it takes for everyone to be able to go back, if that ever happens, people are going to start moving from the city. They're going to say, well, for similar reasons that an office lease is expensive, so is my lease on my apartment. I can do this job from somewhere that's cheaper to live in. I'm not going out into the place where I'm living anyway. I want to be closer to my family, to my significant other's family. And for all those reasons, people are going to start being more distributed. And so to keep that talent, offices are going to have to support remote workers. And once some people are remote, the value of going in where that remote person is no longer the only person videoing into the meeting is going to be lessened. And so I think people will sort of sort themselves into the people who really either need to be in the office, their bosses think they need them to be in the office, or are okay not being in the office and the bosses are not okay. And I think some people will trade off some privacy and say, you know what, you can measure my output more closely, or you can monitor what I'm doing throughout the day more closely. Some people already give that up without knowing they do, but maybe there will be a more explicit kind of trade-off there.
That's interesting. I think that 5 years is still not enough time for the mentality of the people in charge to change. I think that there is this idea that work equals go sit in an office and type next to someone else who's sitting there typing. That doesn't. That's going to be harder. Not that there won't be some forward-thinking companies that do this, and I think you can already sort of see that in, I don't know if they're forward-thinking, but at least tech-savvy places like Amazon and Microsoft. I think were some of the first people to send their workers home. Not just because they were in Seattle, but because they saw that they've created a situation where they can either spy on their workers or they trust their workers. So they have the setup to work from home, and I think that getting places that are run by someone who doesn't understand the the technological things that need to be done in order to make it work mean that in 5 years those people are still going to be in charge, and it'll still be hard to do. But yes, I think that there's going to be so many amazing things that come with this idea. I'm really fascinated that you think that there's going to be a de-urbanization and that happens when people don't have to live in the city to work, because I think that a lot of people that live in the city right now live there because they like living in the city, not because it's where their job is. But
oh yeah, I didn't say everyone.
Yeah.
I think people are just going to have more freedom, and the ones who are there because they need to be may not be there anymore. But we are over time again, so your turn. No, that's okay.
Carl.
David.
There is in the last 3 months or whatever, I don't know what the time period is, but we have decreased our carbon output as the world by 7.6% or something like that. Sorry, we've only decreased it by 6%, but in order to actually match up with what we need to stop the worst effects of climate change, we need to decrease it even more to 7.6% or something like that, by 7.6%.
I think something like that is an important qualifier, because there must be a huge uncertainty band around that. But anyway, that's the estimate.
Yeah. And that, which is that we basically only increase our temperature by 1.5 degrees as opposed to 2.5 degrees. And so that was because of the pandemic, I assume, that we decreased our emissions so much. What do you think our emissions are going to be compared to, when we look at 2021 versus 2019? What do you think the difference is going to be? Oh, and 6%. I guess I should tell you. Yeah.
Oh, you go. Sorry.
No, I was going to say I think it's going to be about 1%.
Down or up?
Down.
Okay, I'm going to say 6%.
6% down. So you think we're actually be somewhat close to our goals? And is that because, Carl, because we've got this, people are going to realize that together we can change the world, sort of thing, or because, or is this going to be solely because production is down and the economy is down?
Well, I think there are other factors. I mean, the economy can shift, and I think so. For instance, airline travel is a huge consumer, at least per person mile. It's a huge consumer of fuel, and I think there's a lot of reason to doubt that it'll rebound fully in 2021. I think just travel in general is going to continue to be hampered. I mean, we just really don't know. We talked before about a vaccine in 2021. Even if there's a vaccine in 2021, will it be 100% effective? Will people trust that it's 100% effective? Will there be mutations? Will there be some new pandemic by then? I mean, there's just like a lot of uncertainty. And I think as much as people are restless, the really restless people who have cars have been going joyriding. So it's not like people have still been going for drives. It's not like you can't. That's a perfectly fine way to physically distance from other people. And I think some of the other requirements for driving, I think a theme here is that I expect people to either continue to change the way they already have, or to consider some of the changes they already made as maybe being ones they continue to want to make even when they don't have to. And you're more expecting a kind of, okay, thank God that was over, we're back. And I think they're both valid, like general predictions. It'll be interesting to see. Probably in some areas you'll be more right, in some areas I'll be more right. But for instance, I think on balance, it's probably a little more efficient for people to get things like delivered to them than for them to all go to the store, just in terms of economies of scale. And I think a lot of people have figured out ways to get a lot of things delivered that they didn't never even consider doing before. And those businesses will have gained new customers and be more powerful. So yeah, I just think there will be enough habits that shift. I don't think we'll be particularly for ecological reasons, although for the people who care about that and see what's possible, they may feel more optimistic, more emboldened, have new ideas about strategies and so on.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel optimistic or not, which is that the entire world is shut down and we're still not meeting our goals for for stopping the worst effects of climate change. But yes, I do feel optimistic in that we are as I like to talk about in general, which is that this idea that yeah, I guess there's some like we're being forced to in some ways by the government to stay inside, but this is basically just like a giant mutual understanding amongst everyone in the world that this is the way we're going to do this. And I think that that's because we realize how deadly this thing is, and I think that something similar could happen with climate change, except that there are like freaking COVID truthers out there who don't believe that there's really a virus or something like that, and that's with literally tens of thousands of people dying, in a week from it. I imagine that as we've seen with climate change, there obviously interest groups out there that are paying to muddy the waters about the worst effects of climate change. But I think that as it gets worse and worse, and I think it will, then people will finally buy in, and we'll have this massive sort of social contract come in, just like we've had with the pandemic, with the virus. And I don't think that's going to happen by next year, but I do think it will happen, and I'm very optimistic, Carl. I think that it will be too late to do anything, but we will do something at that point in time.
Too late to do anything is strong. This is all on a continuum, right? I mean, you and I might have to move away from the coast or might have to move north, but it's not like if we pass some certain threshold, it's certain extinction. I mean, there are stages here. That's depressing, but it's not nihilistic, hopefully. But I think you raise a great point. I mean, I think this collective action point has been impressive, inspiring. And if we were predicting things a year ago and one of us asked this question, if there were a pandemic, how well would we do? I don't know how we'd quantify it, but I think we'd both probably have expected worse than we have done. And you're right, it is mostly voluntary. I mean, to the extent these things are being enforced, it's like occasionally someone gets fined or cops get a little aggressive, but it's not like people are being sent to prison camps if they, I hope, at least in this country, Jesus.
Right.
In general, people are just choosing not out of fear of enforcement, but out of fear of infection, and even more, I think, infecting each other, and even more infecting a stranger who then goes and affects your grandma. People really are behaving collectively in a way that I think game theory and prisoner's dilemma and all those things wouldn't suggest. And that's even with the fact that even before you had these very loud protesters, you had plenty of people who were more quietly violating the orders. And in the case of the pandemic, more so, I think, than global warming, a few people not following the rules could really fuck everything up for everybody. And yet people still kind of held firm and really made a difference. And things would be so much worse right now if we hadn't. So with climate change, where if like 1% of people to continue to be dicks, we could still make an enormous difference.
Unfortunately, they're all oil executives, but yeah.
Yeah, but like they're not going to just burn oil for fun because they hate the earth. They'll try to like make money off it. So
right.
I think that's a case where collective action is even more rewarded. So that is a positive thought, even if 2021 is too soon.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was 5. But do you have anything to add there?
Nope.
Okay, so let's talk about something we were talking about just before we started recording. And I apologize for having some trouble framing this in a way that will be easy to check. Let me try. Let's say that we can know right now at this moment when we're recording on April 22nd, 2020, for the average American, the number of different electronic communication channels that they check every day. So this could be email, Google Chat, Facebook Messenger, Yelp messages, texting, iMessaging if you're on Android, all the possible things, where my number is probably 8 or something, unfortunately. So whatever the average number is for the average American adult, what % change will there be in that in 2030?
2030.
Or what will the count be in 2030? Forget about the percentage change. What will the average number be?
Give me your prediction first.
1, because this shit is stupid and we've got to figure it out in the next 10 years.
I'm going to say 10, because this shit is stupid, but it's getting stupider and I don't see a way to fix it. I will say that I get forwarded like spam messages from my mom on like 6 different platforms now, in a way that like is absurd. Like she like and I think there's something, just like a side tangent, which is there's something about the pandemic that has let all of our older relatives feel like they can now forward us the stuff that we had trained them out of for so long. And
Finally, an excuse.
and literally I'm getting, like the forward, attachment
FWD,
things.
F
Yeah.
capital W, yeah.
And then it's like a giant file of a video that shouldn't be a link. You know what I mean? It is absurd. But I
And
think
I got one of those recipe chain letter things from someone our age. So it's not just the older generation. One of our college classmates, in fact.
But I do think that's like people have, when there's like the people that have been wanting to do it and have been told by their relatives that they're no longer allowed to do it, and then there's people who have either been too busy doing other stuff to never fallen into this pit, and now we've got all of them together. But I think that there is this. I was just thinking about this today, which is that right now, to my kids, when they communicate, they have Zoom, and then they have school Zoom, which is a different Zoom, which is they have to log into a different account to do it. They have FaceTime, they have Hangouts, they have Facebook Messenger, and that's not even letting them get into a bunch. They chat in a Discord or for Minecraft, and they play this thing called Adventure Academy where they chat in that with people, and they have no idea where all of the conversations they're having are taking place. And I think it breaks their brain in some ways, in that they're just like everything is like they have no idea how to follow their conversations. And I think that it's getting worse. And for me, at least, like I'm in like 2 different WhatsApp conversations with you, Carl, and also our text messages, and also
And a hangout.
and we're on Skype for some reason right now. Yeah, it is.
It lets you record.
Yes, and that's what I think it is that they're basically, all these platforms are going to pick one thing that they're good at to keep them diversified and keep them ahead, and that Skype is going to realize that they got their butt kicked by Zoom and everything except for recording, and so this is going to be the place where doofuses like us go to practice like podcasts. I think that, or video podcasts or whatever, and I think that is basically each one of these things will have some slightly different thing that they do in order to stay viable, and it's gonna be a mess. As we were talking about before, there will be an aggregator, a wolf out there.
I mean, I did say the number you check every day, like that. As they can all do their thing, but if you know that you can send it out however you want it, and I know I can receive it any way I want it, that's a much better system than what we have now.
And it's sort of like where you've got multiple aliases on your email. I assume you do this too, right? Where you can send a message from your work account or your Gmail account or your whatever account, and it all comes back to the same place. So to you, it feels like one thing, even though you can look like 7 different things to other people. So maybe we could do that. There will be someone who figures out how to do all of that. There was a great thing called Plex, which is basically takes all your different movie files and sorts them into. This is for illegally watching movies on online, so maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but this is at any rate, it basically finds all of your movie files and organizes them, even if they're all on different players and whatever, and so that you can at least look at your library and play from there, even if that's any of those actual places would be, and that's why Plex.
Yeah, it's like exist. Roku and on demand. You can search every. You don't have to know which channel or which app or whatever. I mean, I think there we will have layers that will make this possible. All right, I know we're over time though, and it's your turn with your last prediction before I do my last one.
Okay, last prediction is not a verifiable prediction, I think, but so. There have been these sort of socially distanced cultural things that have emerged since COVID. Like there's this, like DJ Nice does these like giant virtual discos. There's been like drive-by parades for people's birthdays. There's like these weird things that never really happened before that are happening now. And which of these things do you think is going to continue the most? Is that I don't know how you measure this. After the pandemic is over, which of these things do you think is going to like basically make it out of into sort of our the way that we do things going forward. And for me, I think it's going to be birthday tributes.
And what do you mean by that? What is
I
a birthday
think that as we did for our friend's 40th birthday recently, what up, Dino? Is instead of going to a party at his house and telling him how much we loved him, we instead got on a I don't know, Skype or whatever. Probably not Skype because nobody uses Skype, but we recorded ourselves on our iPhones, basically saying nice things to Dino and then sending it off to a shared drive that he got to look at all of these people saying nice things to him. And in fact, in this case, I think somebody actually like edited it to make it worthwhile. But I've done this now for 3 separate birthdays where everyone in the family just shouts at the camera and says something nice. And I thought that was something that never would have really happened. Likely, I mean, some like super organized people do that for birthdays, but to make this a regular thing that people do at birthdays, I think it's kind of lovely and sort of silly that we hadn't been doing it before.
Yeah, and I did something like that. It wasn't my idea. I was solicited to do something like that for someone last year, not for a birthday, but she was changing jobs, and the people who were congratulating her and kind of paying tribute were scattered geographically. So I think people were doing it before. I think it is happening more now, and it'll continue to happen more now. I think it's a good one. I mean, it's not like you gave me a menu, so this may be too similar to what you suggested, but I think people are recognizing just how close to the real thing or how little you can give up when you get together with people, if you want to gain, being able to get together with people who are not near you. And even before I'm going to call it social distancing. I'm going to go with the recommended physical distancing because I think all of this is not socially distant. It's actually, we're being quite social with each other right now. I think that when I had a Seder and just had random people pop in, when my dad's organizing a Zoom with our relatives in Israel this weekend, getting together, especially for family ritualistic kind of events where people used to travel and some might still want to, but some maybe never even, it wouldn't have occurred to them because there'd be nowhere for them to stay and it would be too expensive and their work schedules and whatever, will continue to join in that way. And I think people will figure out how to kind of mix the in-person and even if there's more than 2 people, the technology will find a way. There will be a nice solution where you can have a group of 5 and a group of 5 somewhere else, and they can sort of all enjoy each other's company, so to speak. And I think the other sort of related thing that will persist is religious services. I've now attended a few religious services, not in my own city, because I was curious and I never would have attended before. And it made me realize I can now attend anyone, anywhere in the world. There's no reason it has to be my local one. I like the community. It makes sense I would want a local community, but why not also why not go to synagogue with my cousin in Boston or in Jerusalem? I mean, that's something I never would have thought of doing before, but especially when it's religiously appropriate that you can have videos. So maybe not on the Sabbath for religious Jews, but for Christian services, for, Thursday night minyan, for things where it's okay. I think this is going to be seen as a really promising channel for these religious organizations. And for people around the world, it'll be a way to tap into different communities, different leaders. It's just a sort of a logical extension of the television, superstars of Christianity. This is just extending it to even your local deacon.
That sounds really cool. I think you could probably figure out a way to have like a Sabbath Goy TV station going as well, or something like that.
Just
but
keep it on, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can hop between services. Like, why stay at one? Let's tune into what they're doing.
I think that's really smart, and I think that there is it's still slightly awkward now to do like a distributed Seder or whatever, at least for us, where it's always Seders are awkward to begin with family. And so I don't know that it made it worse. It was just awkward. And I think as we figure out, like, how do we get this up on the big screen? How do we figure out how to show the table as well as us? And how do we figure out how to mute, grandpa or whatever? Like, this is like, these are things that I think there's a lot of thought going into this sort of stuff now. And I think you're right that this seems to me like something that we're going to figure out, and I'm going to be able to go to so many bar mitzvahs that I would have had to like send, notes about how sad I was that I wasn't going to be able to make it or whatever.
Or like spend $1,000 in a whole weekend. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that is really that's really great. I think that's great for everybody. I don't think there's any real loss to any of that. And I think that for me, that makes me feel sort of warmer about sort of our connections with the world. And I don't know that I'll still be doing like chats with all my roommates from college at every Wednesday evening or whatever. That may get weird if or feel weird at least if you can actually just like go hang out with them at some point, once a year. But it's been really nice. I look forward to it. I just don't know if socially that's going to be a thing, but maybe that's my problem and not everyone's problem. So
yeah, and if it's your problem and the rest of them want to keep doing it and they still see you in person, that can work. Like the ones who like it. Okay, I think that was 5, and I think we both kind of agree with each other, and it's a similar theme of keeping the good parts of what's happening now. My last one is very on brand for me. It's tennis related. And I think it's only fair to give you the context that I'm using. I know we're trying to give no context, but this is very specific. You probably saw it yourself. Roger Federer tweeted today effectively that he thinks it's time for the ATP, the men's tour, and the WTA, the women's tour to merge.
I did see that. I thought you were going to talk about Djokovic, so I'm glad you're not. Keep going.
I don't know how to predict that one, but yeah, it occurred to me. I think you're referring to Djokovic's excellent backhand. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that one. So Federer's not predicting anything, but he's saying that he thinks the ATP and WTA should merge, or he's saying it in kind of indirect way. Will they merge, and in what year? I predict yes, and 2020. What do you think?
I don't know the current financial situation of either of these places. I know that the fact that a lot of the majors the slams had to.
Majors is
fine. I'm sure that tennis is a really hard one because there are only certain places that make money, and that must be rough. I think that the things that Federer was pointing out, which is that there are different ranking systems and different point systems, and it's absurd, and we're arguing about how they treat their different players and things like that. That stuff could all be coordinated without them joining. And I think it should be. Like, it's absurd that it's not. It's hard to be I am a very big tennis fan, and I still don't understand the differences in the point rankings and stuff like that. But I think that it would be hard to. I think that the actual reason that they should join together, which is to give more, I assume to give more power to the players in terms of figuring out their futures. It seems like something that the men's tennis has gone out of its way to not help women's tennis in general. And I don't know that that they would do more of it now that there's probably going to be a smaller pie. So I'm going to say that they will not, and that they won't ever, and that eventually there will be some sort of like golf-esque thing where a bunch of players run off and start their own sort of star league. I don't know if the golf has actually done that yet, but they're claiming that they might do that, and I think that seems more likely to me than everybody playing nice. But I don't know the internal dynamics of it, so maybe it's closer and people are warmer than I think. But watching the external statements for the last few years, it doesn't feel like that to me.
I didn't hear a prediction. Is that no?
I said no. They're never going to get together.
Never going to get together. Okay.
And that both leagues will fold before they do.
Oh wow. Okay. I think everything you say makes sense and is plausible, and I don't feel super confident in this prediction. By the way, that was just the 7 p.m. clapping for frontline workers, and then at 7:02 in our neighborhood, somebody plays taps on some kind of horn instrument. We can't actually see the player, but it's become a nightly thing here. I think that there's really not a great reason why they're separate right now. You gave some sort of institutional reasons and inertia and sexism and all that, but there's not really like a really strong argument for it. Like if you were starting over now, not only would they probably not be separate, but you wouldn't have 4 different organizations running the 4 slams. You wouldn't have the ITF running a bunch of events and Davis Cup, and you wouldn't have World Team Tennis running its own thing. You would have much more unity here. But there was a very specific reason I made that prediction, and that's why I felt like I should give the context. Federer tends not to go out on a limb, so I felt pretty strongly that this was him signaling that this is going to happen, either because he already knows and this is a way to kind of be out in front and also kind of get people ready for it, or because he is so powerful that once he gets behind something as publicly as he did, people will make it happen. And I do think, to your point of a spin-off league or whatever, the top men have been very good in their messaging and their actions about emphasizing that they had to protect the lower ranked, lower paid players. They've helped to start a program to get money to the players who make the least to kind of keep them going right now. And, you know, they probably haven't done everything they could do, but they've been pretty clear that they could clearly make more money and have much easier lives if they broke off and just played exhibitions all year between the 3 of them, Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal. Like that would probably make about as much money as, or a big chunk of what tennis makes now. But I think for reasons that are partly selfish, where the slams need to feel meaningful for them, winning them to feel like it counts, they do want tennis to continue kind of as it is now, and they need a lot of players for that to work. So anyway, I just think if Federer's doing it, my prediction 24 hours ago would have been no, never. And my prediction now is probably because he said they should.
And do you think that I'm not super familiar with Federer's thoughts on this in general? Is he? Do you think that this is something that he would want to have happen if it weren't necessarily in the cards to happen? Like if it were 50-50 right now, would he be the one pushing it to happen?
I think it's possible. I mean, I think that he sees that just in the sports and his own self-interest, it makes sense to consolidate things, have more centralized decision-making. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the French Open unilaterally chose a new date without consulting or telling anyone. And I think that was a great signal of, oh, maybe we should actually all be doing this stuff together. I also think a lot of men's and women's players have been, you know, chatting with each other and doing videos and just, you know, realizing that they have way more common interests than different interests. And the slams are the cash cows, and those are equal events in terms of pay and participation and everything. You know, and Federer's married to a former pro women's player who is very influential in his life, and I'm sure that's a factor. Martina Hingis is from his country, and they're close. I mean, he's already had lots of connections to women's tennis beyond just being a tennis player. He's always, you know, acknowledged women's players and acknowledged the results and clearly follows it. So I think he's just very careful. It could be that at any point, if anyone had asked him in his career, he would have said, this is what I prefer, but that he wouldn't actually go out there and say it publicly until he thinks the time is right.
Interesting. Well, I think that would be great for tennis in a lot of ways, because I think that one of the major things that worries me about the future of the sport is that there are so many different interests going on, and that I basically anything could happen, and I would be like, oh yeah, that sort of makes sense given the competing interest here. And I also think that tennis is fascinating because it's one of the few sports where the women's league has, could in many ways is the equal to the men's in terms of, at least in terms of viewer interest and things of that nature. So I think it could be a model for lots of other sports if it does work out in a good way, I think.
All right. Well, we're out of time. In fact, I think it's a fair prediction to say we'll probably continue to go over 5 minutes until we have an actual alarm bell or something. But I think that we spent our time well. I hope you do too. You, David, and you, anyone who happens to be watching or listening to this.
Yes, we appreciate you.
Yes. Thanks for doing this with me again, David. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carl.
And we'll be back at some point, whatever that means, with another episode of the show to be named later. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, stop.
All right.